Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos. This is called framed quarter squares, 12-inch finished. Here's the diagram, and what I've done is taken quarter square triangles and just put a frame around it. You know, you can take any kind of unit and put a frame around it and you have an instant scrap quilt. You can do a square, 4-patch, circles. You know, you'd have to applique those probably, but any unit you can think of and that you want to make a lot of, put a frame around it and make it any size you want, and you've got a scrap quilt. Here are 4 blocks set block to block. In the diagrams here and the pictures, I've made all of the quarter square triangles different colors. In my demo, I'm going to make them all the same, because if you use the method of making quarter square triangles 4 at a time, then you can either put them all together in one block, or you can separate them out into multiple blocks if you're making a big scrap quilt. And the reason you do that is you make 4 at a time, and also if you're cutting them, if we look at patch C down here, which cuts the quarter square triangles, you always start with a square and you cut it in half twice and you get 4 pieces. So the only way to get this one little piece here is to cut a big square and to get 4 pieces. It just depends on where you want to use your fabrics and how many blocks you're making. Since I'm just making 1 block, I'm going to use all the same colors in mine. And also, if you're using AccuQuilt, and here are the AccuQuilt dies that will cut this, here's the die for the AccuQuilt to cut quarter square triangles, and you'll have a big square you'll put over these, and you'll get 4 from one pass. I guess you could put a little piece down here just to get 1, but that's a lot of trouble, and if you're going to make more blocks, you may as well get your 4 at a time. So that's why I set it up that way. And I'm just explaining that right here. In the fabric requirements I have, if you're going to do 4 different quarter square triangles in each block, then this is what you cut. If you're going to do 4 identical, then this is what you cut. And the same thing down here for your accent fabrics. And these patches A and B are for the frames. So the first thing we'll do is sew our quarter square triangles. Then we'll start sewing our frames around each individual unit and then put the 4 units together into a block. And I call this a 2x2 grid. There's 2 across and 2 down. It's a 12-inch block, so each unit in here is 6 inches finished. Here are the fabrics. These are for the frame, and these are for the quarter square triangles. I cut these with the AccuQuilt. If you're cutting squares with rotary cutting or with AccuQuilt, this is how they're cut. So for rotary cutting, you cut a square. This AccuQuilt cuts off the points, so all of these points are cut off in the corners. But for rotary cutting, you'll have a square, then you cut it in half once on the diagonal, and then twice on the diagonal, and this is how you get your 4 patches. They're exactly the same as if you would cut AccuQuilt. Now to piece these, we're going to put these like this, and we want to make these straight. So we'll flip this over, and these pieces are all the same, so we match all 3 sides. We'll stitch a 1/4 inch here. Do the same thing for this one, flip it over, match all 3 sides. I'm not doing a good job in the picture, but then stitch your 1/4 inch here. Then press your seams and we'll come back and finish this. And here are our 2 halves. They've been pressed. Now we'll just flip this over, match the seam line, and match all 3 sides and stitch a 1/4 inch. Then press your seams. Here's our quarter square triangle. It's finished. If you want to know how to make quarter square triangles 4 at a time, stay tuned for this short tutorial that will show you how. For the quarter square triangles 4 at a time, we have our 4 squares. This fabric will show up twice in each quarter square triangle. Put these right sides together So one with the dark and one with the light. Mark a diagonal line on the backs of both of these fabrics. Stitch on both sides of the diagonal line on both of these pieces. Cut on the diagonal line. Normally I press the seams open, but for this technique, press toward the fabric that is duplicated. Press toward the yellow fabric on all of these. Take the different fabrics and match them together and flip this over. What we're doing is making sure the yellow fabric is on opposite sides, and we're using the seam allowance or the pressed seam as our guide, and we're nesting these seams. And you want to make sure that all of these sides are even. Draw another diagonal line. I like to put some pins on here just to hold it in place while I take it over to the sewing machine, because I don't want the seams to unnest. Stitch on both sides of the diagonal line and do the same thing for this set. Cut them apart on the diagonal line, and when we open them up, we have quarter square triangles. They all look the same. Press open and then cut off all the nubs. Now for our next step, we'll take the small frame piece. This is patch B. We'll sew one to each side. It doesn't really matter which side you sew it to, because when you see the whole finished unit, it will look the same. So stitch a B patch to both sides of all of your quarter square triangle units. Now we have our side frames put on, and we will just put our top and bottom frames on. Sew the top and the bottom frames and press. And do the same thing for all the units. Now here are our 4 framed units. And if you'll notice, I have all of the quarter square triangles facing the same way. And also the tops and bottoms are all at the top and bottom. If we sewed these together like this, we would have to match these 2 seams. And the same thing down here. So what I like to do is flip them. Flip this and flip this. Now you have no seams to match there, no seams to match there, none here and none here. The only thing you'll have to match is when you sew this row to this row, and you'll have to match right here. So now just lay these out how you like them and watch how the frames are if that matters to you. So these 2 together and these 2, press the seams, and then sew the rows together. Before I show you the block, I wanted to address a comment somebody made a few weeks ago, or a little while ago, in the comment section. It was a very good comment. She said that she would like to have larger blocks, and I answered her back that you can always enlarge almost any of these blocks. This unit, the quarter square triangle unit, is a 3-inch finished unit, and this is 1.5 inch and 1.5 inch finished. So that makes this a 6-inch finished unit in the corner. So the same with all of these. If you wanted to make this block larger, one way to enlarge it is to add an inch to all the finished sizes. This is a 3-inch finished quarter square triangle. If you make that a 4-inch finished quarter square triangle, then that would be 4 inches. And these are 1.5 inch finished this way. So if you made these 2.5 inch finished, that would be 9 inch finished here instead of a 6 inch. So that would be a much bigger block. You could make a 9-inch block out of this easily. But it's really easy to enlarge a block, usually it is, by just adding an inch to the finished size. And because if you add an inch to the finished size, that usually helps you'll get common measurements like 3-inch, 4-inch, 2-inch, 5-inch, like that. So just play around with your numbers and see how you like it. And you don't have to make these the same size I make them for a 12-inch block. So here's the block, and for this one I reverted back to my pressing to one side. It just seemed to always want to go that way. So on this one I did press to one side after I finished the quarter square triangles. Quarter square triangles are pressed open. Everything else is pressed to one side. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.